The ringtone, a jarringly cheerful marimba melody I'd set for my father and forgotten to change, sliced through the 3 a.m. silence of my Tokyo hotel suite. For a disoriented second, I thought it was my morning alarm. My body, still humming with the adrenaline from closing a 9-figure real estate deal just hours before, protested the intrusion. My head was thick with fatigue, a pleasant exhaustion born from a week of intense negotiations, late-night strategy sessions with my team, and navigating the delicate dance of Japanese business etiquette. The deal was done. The ink was dry on a contract that would add a signature skyscraper to Summit Property Holdings' international portfolio. I should have been dead asleep, dreaming of architectural blueprints and return on investment. Instead, I was fumbling for the phone on the bedside table, the city lights of Shinjuku painting a futuristic glow across the room. My dad's name flashed on the screen. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach, instantly chasing away the last vestiges of sleep. My parents didn't call it this hour. They operated on a strict 9 to 5 schedule, even in their retirement, a call at 3 a.m., which was 2 p.m. His time meant one of two things: a medical emergency, or he'd found a new reason to be disappointed in me. Lately, it was always the latter. Dad, I answered, my voice raspy. Is everything okay? Is Mom all right? She's fine. Jessica? Fine, he said. His voice was a strange cocktail of feigned concern and something that sounded unnervingly like satisfaction. It was a tone I knew all too well. It was his I told you so voice. I'm calling about you. Are you watching the news? I sat up, swinging my legs over the side of the king-size bed. The silk robe felt cool against my skin. The news? Dad, I'm in Tokyo. It's the middle of the night. What's going on? I glanced at the panoramic window. Below me, the city was a sprawling, neon-lit circuit board, pulsing with a life that never seemed to cease. It was a world away from the sleepy suburban street where my parents lived. It's your building, he said, and the satisfaction in his tone sharpened into something verging on glee. Your apartment building. It's on fire. It's all over the local news channel. My blood ran cold, not with fear for my possessions. Everything of value was either with me or easily replaceable. But with a sudden, sharp understanding of what this call was really about. This wasn't a call from a concerned father to his daughter. This was an ambush, a fire. I asked, keeping my voice deliberately level. I was already reaching for my laptop on the desk. A big one, from the looks of it, he continued, his voice dripping with paternalistic pity. 3rd floor, started in the kitchen of that apartment on the N3B, I think. The reporter said it's spreading. Look, Jessica, don't you worry about a thing. Your mother and I, we have the guest room ready for you. You can come home. We'll help you get back on your feet. Get back on your feet. The phrase hung in the air between Tokyo and Pennsylvania, a perfect encapsulation of their perception of my life. For the past decade, they had clung to the narrative that I was their struggling artist, their free-spirited but floundering daughter. They pictured me living paycheck to paycheck in a tiny rental, pursuing some vague, creative career that they couldn't be bothered to understand. They thought my life was a charming, if slightly pathetic failure. A direct consequence in their minds of me ignoring their sensible advice to get a teaching degree and marry a nice local boy. This fire to my father wasn't a tragedy. It was a vindication. It was the inevitable, dramatic climax of the story they'd written for me. The one where the prodigal daughter finally hits rock bottom and has no choice but to crawl back to the safety of home. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I pulled up the internal dashboard for Summit Property Holdings. A red alert was already flashing on the screen next to Grandview Complex. My property manager, David, was already on it. I could see the incident log updating in real time. "That's very generous of you, Dad," I said, my voice airily calm. I clicked open the live feed from the building's security and emergency systems. "But the guest room won't be necessary." "Now, Jessica, don't be proud," he chided, his voice softening into the syrupy tone he used when he thought he was being magnanimous. "There's no shame in it. This is what family is for. We knew that little online thing you were doing wouldn't last forever. It's a tough world out there. We just want you to be safe." The little online thing he was referring to was Summit Technologies, the AI-driven customer service software company I had founded from scratch 6 years ago, the company that currently served over 4,000 corporate clients worldwide and generated $15 million in annual recurring revenue. The company whose success had funded the acquisition of the real estate firm I'd bought 2 years later. I watched the live feed. The fire was on the 3rd floor, just as he'd said, but I could also see the building's advanced sprinkler system had already activated, containing the blaze to a single unit. The fire department was on the scene, not battling an inferno, but managing a controlled situation. The damage, while unfortunate for the tenant of 3B, would be minimal to the structure itself. It was a crisis, yes, but a manageable one. It was my crisis to manage. A profound, wary sadness washed over me, eclipsing the stress of the situation. They had no idea who I was. For years, I had tried to tell them. I'd tried to share my victories, my milestones. When I won the Philadelphia Innovator of the Year award, I'd invited them to the Black Tie Gala. They declined, saying it was a long drive and they needed to repot their geraniums that weekend. When I offered to pay for my mother's knee replacement surgery with cash, they'd laughed it off. "That's sweet, honey," my mother had said, patting my hand. "But we have insurance. You save your money for your rent." Each attempt to share my reality was met with a gentle, dismissive pat on the head. They saw my success not as an achievement, but as a flight of fancy, an amusing story I was telling myself. Their belief in my failure was so absolute, so foundational to their view of the world, that they couldn't process any evidence to the contrary. So, eventually, I stopped trying. I built my life in the quiet, in the space they couldn't see. I bought the penthouse in the Grandview Complex, a building I chose for its proximity to my downtown office, and let them believe I was renting a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor. I drove my Tesla but parked it in a private garage, taking a ride share whenever I visited them. I lived a life of quiet luxury and immense professional responsibility, all while allowing them to maintain their comfortable, condescending narrative. But the fire had changed the equation. His glee, his poorly veiled excitement at my presumed downfall, had burned through the last of my patience. The lie, the double life, had become too heavy to carry. It was time to finally turn on the lights. "Dad," I said, my voice no longer just calm, but carrying a new weight of authority. I was no longer Jessica, the struggling daughter. I was Jessica Thorne, the CEO of 2 companies, speaking. "I appreciate the offer. I really do. But I'm not worried about finding a place to sleep." "What do you mean?" he asked, a flicker of confusion in his voice. This wasn't following his script. I minimized the video feed and pulled up the county property records. "I'm not worried because I'm not a tenant in that building." There was a pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, trying to make sense of my words. "You moved out? You didn't tell us you moved." "Jessica, with what money? Are you in some kind of trouble?" I took a deep breath. The air in the climate-controlled hotel room felt electric. This was it, the point of no return. No. Dad, I said, my voice as clear and steady as a pane of glass. I'm not a tenant. I'm the landlord. Silence. Complete, unadulterated, echoing silence on the other end of the line. For a moment, I thought the call had dropped. I could hear the faint, tinny sound of the local news broadcast in the background of his living room, a reporter's voice droning on about the fire. He was still there. He was just processing. Or, more likely, failing to. What? He finally croaked the single word of Peter's squeak. The smug satisfaction was gone, replaced by pure, uncomprehending bewilderment. I own the Grandview complex, Dad, I stated matter-of-factly. The whole thing. All 12 stories, 150 units, the gym, the underground parking, the retail space on the ground floor. My company, Summit Property Holdings, acquired it 18 months ago. I could hear my mother's voice in the background, a muffled, "What is it?" "Frank, what's she saying?" He didn't answer her. He was still talking to me, his voice a disbelieving whisper. You own the building." "No. That's impossible. That's a luxury building. It must be worth, I don't know. The last valuation was just over $32 million. I supplied, the number rolling off my tongue with the ease of long familiarity. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was just stating a fact. It was a fact that had defined my life for the past year and a half, a fact as real to me as the laptop under my fingers. To him, it was a fantasy. 32 million, he stammered. I heard a fumbling sound, like he dropped the phone or had to sit down abruptly. "Jessica, this isn't a time for jokes. Your home is on fire." "I'm not joking," I said, and my voice was softer now. The anger was gone, replaced by that same old wary sadness. "And it's not just my home. It's my asset, and it's my responsibility." While he was trying to reboot his entire understanding of his daughter's existence, I was already working. My other phone, my work line, was buzzing to life. A multi-person chat had been initiated by my senior property manager. I propped my personal phone against a book, putting my dad on speaker, and started typing with one hand while talking into my work headset. "Meg David, status report. David, property manager, Ms. Thorne. Apologies for the hour. FD is on site. Blaze is contained to 3B. Sprinkler system activated as designed. Full building evacuation is underway. Protocol followed perfectly by the night staff. No injuries reported. Meg, excellent. What's the preliminary damage assessment? Davig smoke and water damage to the third floor corridor and units 3A and 3C. Unit 3B is a total loss. Structural integrity of the building is sound. Jessica, I don't understand." My father's voice crackled from the speakerphone. He sounded small and lost. "Where would you get that kind of money? Did you win the lottery? Is this something to do with that man you were seeing?" I had to bite back a bitter laugh. Of course. In his world, a woman couldn't possibly achieve this kind of success on her own. It had to be luck, or it had to be a man. The idea that his daughter, the one who couldn't even balance a checkbook in his eyes, had built this herself was simply not in the realm of possibility. "No, Dad, I didn't win the lottery. And there is no man," I said, my attention still split. I was now on a 3-way call with David and the fire chief on scene, a stoic, competent man named Battalion Chief Miller. "Ma'am?" Chief Miller's voice was gravelly but professional. "Your fire suppression system is top of the line. We have the situation under control. My team will be clearing the building for re-entry on floors 1, 2, and 4 through 12 within the hour." "Thank you, Chief," I replied calmly. "Please extend my deepest gratitude to your team. Send any and all necessary invoices directly to my property manager. To David, I said, David, initiate the resident relocation protocol for the third floor. I want every affected tenant checked into the Marriott Grand by morning. Bill it to the corporate account and get our insurance adjuster on the phone. I want him on site at sunrise. My father was listening to all of this, a silent, stunned witness. I could picture him in his worn-out armchair, the remote control fallen to the floor, his face pale. My mother was probably standing behind him, a hand on his shoulder, both of them staring at the phone as if it were an alien artifact. I was speaking a language they didn't recognize, moving through a world they didn't know existed. Jessica, who are you talking to? He finally managed to ask. I'm talking to the fire chief and my property manager, Dad, I said, turning my full attention back to him. I'm managing the situation. But your company, you sell, I don't know, knitted hats on the internet or something. He said, grasping for the last shreds of his comfortable narrative. He was referring to an Etsy shop I had briefly run in my early 20s over a decade ago, a hobby that had earned me maybe $500 in total. That was the last business venture of mine that had registered in his brain as plausible. It was time to burn that narrative to the ground, just as a Part 3B was being reduced to ash. No, Dad. I don't sell knitted hats, I said, pulling up my corporate portfolio. It was time for the whole truth. No more hiding, no more downplaying, no more letting their disbelief shape my reality. I own 2 companies. The first is Summit Property Holdings, the real estate investment firm that the Grand View and a dozen other commercial and residential properties across the country. The entire portfolio is currently valued at approximately $420 million. I let that number sit in the silence for a moment. I could hear a sharp intake of breath, probably my mother's. The second company, I continued, my voice unwavering, is the one I started first 6 years ago. It's called Summit Technologies. We develop and license a proprietary AI-based customer service software platform. It's used by over 4,000 companies globally. That's my little online thing. And it's what paid for everything else. I didn't mention my personal net worth. I didn't mention the liquid assets, the stock portfolio, or the charitable foundation I was in the process of setting up. The number I had already given him was more than his mind could handle. It was like trying to explain quantum physics to a toddler. 420 million. He repeated, his voice barely a whisper. The number sounded absurd on his tongue. It was an abstraction, a headline from a business magazine, not something connected to his daughter. You're lying. You have to be. The accusation didn't even sting. It was the desperate last gasp of a man whose entire worldview had just been shattered. He wasn't accusing me of dishonesty. He was begging me to tell him the world was still the way he thought it was. I'm not lying, Dad. My work was done for the moment. The crisis was contained. The protocols were in motion. My team was exceptional. I could finally focus on this, the personal crisis that had been simmering for a decade. Why do you think I live so quietly? Why do you think I never talk about work? Because every time I tried, you and Mom told me to get a real job. You told me I was being unrealistic. You told me to give up and come home. A memory, sharp and painful, surfaced. I was 27, sitting at their kitchen table. I just secured my first round of seed funding for Summit Technologies, $250,000. I was ecstatic, terrified, and bursting with pride. I tried to explain the concept to them, the algorithms, the market potential. My father had listened with a patient, indulgent smile, The same one he used when his friend's toddler showed him a crayon drawing. "That's nice, dear," he'd said when I finished. What about that opening for a substitute teacher at the high school?" "That's a steady paycheck." "A pension? You should really think about it." I had felt something inside me just with her. A little light of hope that they might finally see me extinguished. I never mentioned venture capital to them again. "Wep, we just wanted you to be secure." My mother's voice suddenly cut in. She must have taken the phone from him. Her voice was thin and trembling. "We were worried about you, Jessica. We saw you working all those hours, always on that computer. We thought you were struggling, that you were alone." I was working. I said the words feeling heavy and inadequate. I wasn't struggling. I was building. I wasn't alone. I had a team. I invited you to the award ceremony. I invited you to the office launch party. I offered to fly you both to Paris for your anniversary, first class. You said no to all of it. You said you were worried about the cost, that I shouldn't be spending money I didn't have. We thought it was borrowed money," my dad exclaimed, his voice returning with a defensive edge. "We thought you were in debt up to your eyeballs, trying to keep up appearances." And there it was. The crux of it all. They had so little faith in my abilities that the only possible explanation for any sign of success was that it was a sham, a house of cards about to collapse. My quiet competence looked to them like a desperate lie. My exhaustion returned a deep, bone-weary ache that had nothing to do with jet lag. "I'm going to send you an email," I said, my voice flat. "I'm sending it to your account right now, Dad. It will have links to the public records for Summit Property Holdings. It will have the company registration for Summit Technologies. It will have a link to the article in Forbes that was written about me last year. And I'm going to attach a redacted copy of latest personal financial statement. I want you to look at it. I want you to look at all of it and think then we can talk." I composed the email with mechanical efficiency, attaching the files that represent a decade of relentless work, of sacrifice, of risks that paid off spectacularly. The deed to the grand view, the LLC paperwork, the financial statement from my private banker with the final tally at the bottom, total liquid assets at $260 million. Total assets, including real estate and private equity, $680 million. I blacked out the account numbers, but left the totals. They needed to see the totals. I hit send. The little whoosh sound from my laptop echoed in the silent hotel room. It felt like a gunshot. Or a starting pistol. I wasn't sure the email is sent. I told them, "I have to go. I have a fire to deal with." I hung up before they could reply. I needed space. I needed to breathe air that wasn't thick with the weight of their disbelief. I stood up and walked to the vast window, leaning my forehead against the cool glass. Below, Tokyo glittered as a testament to human ingenuity, ambition, and resilience. A city of millions of people, each with their own story, their own struggles, their own secret successes. For the first time in a very long time, I felt seen. Not by my parents, but by the reflection staring back at me in the glass, a woman in a silk robe, silhouetted against a city of endless possibilities, a woman who had just put out a fire on 2 different continents at the same time. The next 24 hours were a blur of logistics. I rescheduled my flight, arranged a virtual meeting with my new partners in Tokyo to assure them everything was under control, and managed the post-fire recovery from my hotel suite. My team on the ground was phenomenal. By the time I landed back in the States, the tenants from the 3rd floor were comfortably settled in their temporary hotel rooms. A restoration crew was already at work in the building, and an initial insurance claim had been filed. The building was my asset, but the people inside were my responsibility, and I didn't take that lightly. My parents, however, were silent. The email had been delivered, and I could see from the red receipt that it had been opened just minutes after I sent it. But for a full day, there was nothing. No calls. Just a vast, roaring silence that was, in its own way, more telling than any of their previous lectures. They were processing. They were grappling with a new reality that had bulldozed the old one. The call finally came as I was being driven from the airport to my office. It was my mom. Her name flashed on the screen, and my thumb hovered over the ignore button for a long moment before I sighed and answered. "Hi, Mom. Jessica." Her voice was small, fragile. I had never heard her sound like that before. My mother was a woman of firm opinions and unshakable self-assurance. This timid, hesitant version of her was a stranger. "Your father and we saw the email." "I figured," I said, watching the familiar skyline of my city slide past the car window. "Bet we had no idea," she whispered, and I could hear the tears in her voice. They weren't tears of joy or pride. They were tears of something far more complicating regret. All this time we thought, "Oh, honey, we've been such fools." My own eyes pricked with tears, an emotional dam breaking after years of reinforcement. "Why couldn't you just believe in me, Mom?" The question came out as a raw, aching plea. It was the question I had swallowed 1,000 times. "I don't know," she sobbed. We saw the world as a hard place, and we wanted you to take the safe path, the path we understood. We were so afraid of you getting hurt, of you failing, that we couldn't see that you were flying. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was a start. It was the first crack in the wall of their certainty. Your father," she continued, her voice thick. "He's ashamed, Jessica. He sat at that computer for hours, clicking every link, reading every word. He read that article about you 3 times. He kept whispering, 'That's my girl. That's my girl,' over and over again. He's so proud, but he's so ashamed of how he's treated you." That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to their house, not in a rideshare, but in my own car. I pulled my Tesla Model S Plaid into their driveway right behind my dad's 10-year-old Ford. The house looked exactly the same as it had my entire life. Modest, tidy, with the geraniums my mother prized blooming in their window boxes. It felt like a time capsule. I walked up to the door, and before I could ring the bell, it opened. My father stood there. He looked older than he had a few weeks ago. His eyes were red-rimmed. He didn't say anything. He just opened his arms, and I walked into them. He held me tightly, his hand stroking my hair. And for the first time since I was a little girl, I felt like his daughter again. Not the project, not the disappointment, but just his daughter. "I'm so sorry, Jessie," he mumbled into my hair. "I was a stubborn, old fool. I saw you managing that crisis on the phone, you were a general. You were a CEO. And I was treating you like a child who couldn't pay her rent." A few days later, I invited them to dinner, not at their favorite local diner, but at a Michelin-starred restaurant with a 6-month waiting list. I made the reservation with a single phone call. When they arrived, dressed in their Sunday best and looking completely overwhelmed, the mat treater greeted me by name. "Ms. Thorne, your table is ready. A pleasure to have you back." My parents exchanged a wide-eyed look. This was my world. And for the first time, they were seeing it. Over dinner, they didn't offer advice. They didn't lecture. They asked questions. Timidly at first, then with growing curiosity. They asked about the AI my company designed, And I explained it to them in a way they could understand, using analogies about librarians and encyclopedias. They asked about my real estate projects, about the skyscraper in Tokyo, about my plans for the future. They listened. They really, truly listened with a mixture of awe and pride that was so new, so foreign, it felt like a dream. The following week, I took them on a tour of the Summit Technologies headquarters. It was a sprawling, open concept office in the heart of the tech district, filled with brilliant, energetic young people. My employees, my team. They saw the respect in their eyes when they spoke to me. They saw me lead a meeting, confidently sketching out a 5-year strategy on a whiteboard. My dad stood at the back of the conference room watching me, and I saw a single tear trace a path down his weathered cheek. Later, as we walked through the lobby, he put his arm around my shoulder. All those years, he said, his voice thick with emotion, I was so busy trying to pave a little gravel path for you. I never realized you were busy building your own 4-lane highway. The fire in apartment 3B was a minor incident, quickly forgotten by the news cycle. The damage was repaired, the tenants moved back in, and life went on. But for my family, it was an inferno that had burned away decades of misunderstanding, of pride and prejudice. It had been destructive, yes, but it had also cleared the land. And in that cleared space, something new and infinitely more honest had finally been given the room to grow. I had my companies, I had my success, but as I stood there, flanked by my parents who were finally seeing me for who I was, I felt, for the first time, truly rich.